So if you're struggling to emotionally process everything that happened last Wednesday in the Capitol, watch this video. Nicole and I are going to talk about exactly that and maybe do some of our own processing. But before you do that, please go to selfcaretips.org/free guide and download our self-care plan and learn about how to take care of yourself despite everything that's going on. So hi, Nicole.
Hello. How are we doing?
Oh boy, I don't know how I'm doing.
I hear you.
Yeah, it's been a hell of a week. Not just for us in the U.S., but like probably everywhere. Anyone who gets the news is probably reeling right now.
Yeah.
So what inspired this conversation? We were having a team meeting. So me, Nicole, and Leah, she is our intern at counseling, and Maggie, our executive assistant and marketing person. So what was it? I guess the riots happened on Wednesday and our meeting was Thursday. Is that right?
Yeah, it was right after, the day after.
Yeah, so the very next day we hop on our team meeting and, there's like a long sort of awkward silence. We're like, okay, I guess we should talk about what is going on, right, in the news. And we took some time to like just hash it out a little bit, and we realized that each of us were like processing very differently, right? We each had a very different style of just like facing or not facing what was going on. And one of the important things that came out of that meeting is that, as clinicians, we have to take time to emotionally process whatever's going on in our communities, because we need to be able to hold space for our clients, right? And we don't want our own thoughts and feelings to get in the way of holding that space. But I think that probably applies to anybody, whether you're in a helping profession or you're a member of a family unit, or whatever it is you do. I think that same principle sort of applies. Like we have to process our emotions.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned about just like in the helping profession. I had a client of mine ask me well, how do you not get stressed out of all the things that you hear, or just dealing with life in general? And I was like, well, that's assuming that I don't get stressed out.
Right. We definitely get stressed. Yeah.
Yeah. We're human beings, and things happen, whether it's in our personal life or seeing all the things that have been happening, especially with the Capitol, with COVID, with just racial injustice in general. There's just a lot of things that have happened, and it by no means is that I don't get affected by it, or that we're immune to those responses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's interesting how many more of my friends and colleagues who provide mental health services have gone back to their own therapy in the past year, right? Because I think it's good that we all practice what we preach, but also we're existing through this collective trauma, right? And how can we possibly help others if we don't also seek help ourselves?
Absolutely. A book I'm reading, it basically says some of the best therapists have their own therapist. And I definitely agree, because we still need to have an outlet for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So why talk about our feelings, right? That's the title that we gave today's video. And I think it's I'm one of those therapists that will often dive into the emotional, processing, asking questions, how do you feel about that? I know it's so cheesy, but I love talking about our emotions. I think it's so important. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Why is it important to talk about our feelings?
There's many reasons, but I think one of the biggest is that I kind of equate it to a balloon. All right. So you have a deflated balloon, and things happen during the day that make it inflate, right? Causes stress, causes anxiety, can cause, a lot of different intense emotions, right? And okay, so in the beginning of the day, not so big, not that big of a deal. There's plenty of space for other things to happen. And as the day goes on or the week goes on, it gets bigger and bigger. Why? Because we're not letting any of it out, right? And by the time we get to all the way, like, you know, so the balloon's like this big, I'm trying to like, I'm kind of in the camera, but like, you know, like we're at our threshold to the point where we're about to pop, right?
Right.
And when we pop, what happens?
Yeah.
We start like, you know, having a moment of either like a meltdown, or we find that we're crying at things that we don't usually cry at, or we're irritable, or we can't handle, we keep saying like, I have too much on my plate, it's too much to handle, right?
Yeah. Or we start drinking more than we would normally, or
Yes.
making different choices with what we eat, or substances, right?
Yep, we're not talking to people like we used to, right? We start to really become more withdrawn, and that depression might start to increase, right? Where our anxiety is at an all-time high. And part of coping with those things is being able to get that stuff out, right? It's very much so important, and whether that is like talking it out or finding an outlet for those things, a healthy way to cope with it, like an outlet, that's what really can help us get through it. Because again, if we let it sit there and fester, it becomes bigger and bigger, and it's harder to maintain that, like, you know, just kind of pushing it aside and suppressing those emotions.
Right. Yeah. And so that's a good segue into talking about the difference between avoidance and distraction. Right? Because sometimes we need a distraction, right? We can't constantly be on, or constantly be doing these like deep dives into our mental wellness and our emotional health, like 24/7, right? Not even as therapists, like right? We need a distraction sometimes, and that's okay, and that's healthy. But when it stops being a distraction and starts becoming avoidance is when you don't ever plan to come back to it again. Right? A distraction is like, okay, I'm going to go over here. I'm going to, you know, whatever, make some art, or just like, you know, watch Real Housewives or whatever. And then when I'm ready, I'm going to come back to this thing that is really emotionally triggering. It's avoidance when it's like, okay, I'm just never going to think about that again. And if you bring it up, I'm going to walk away from the conversation. And that's when the balloon gets too full and eventually pops.
Yeah. And I really, you know, speaking of like the Capitol, with everything that happened last Wednesday, of, you know, I kind of was wondering like if I was treading the line between avoidance and distraction. Speaking of distraction, sorry if Bam is making noises over here.
Your puppy.
But like, you know, I was kind of oscillating between, all right, checking the news, seeing if there's something else, like, you know, that was going on, and kind of like getting more information. Because for me, like, knowledge makes me feel more, you know, at ease, because like, you know what's going on. But also knowing like I have my own threshold, right? So like, okay, I have to turn off, you know, the TV. I gotta, you know, put the social media away. I'm, you know, gonna not read some of these articles, and I'm gonna go do something else, like, you know, be with Bam, or make lunch, or, you know, do whatever, you know, had to be done at that point. But you're right, like there is that difference between that avoidance and distraction. I hear all the time, well, I was feeling this way, but, you know, for the rest of the day I just focused on work, and, you know, I just got it out of my head and it was okay. But we're also saying about feeling really stressed out, and we're really like feeling that irritability. And you were saying about like, so are we really dealing with it if we're just putting it down and just getting into work? Not necessarily. There's a difference between the two.
Yeah. And it takes practice to recognize that, right? And that's okay. And that's why we go to therapy, right?
Yeah.
We need an objective person outside of our circle to be like, hey, like, come back in here so that we can talk about this.
Right.
And I kind of swung in the opposite direction. Like after the riots at the Capitol, I went like full on into NPR mode. I mean, I had the news on for hours and hours. I at one point had CNN on the computer and NPR playing on the radio. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna need a news diet soon. I'm gonna need some boundaries around this. So distraction and avoidance aren't the only directions that we can go. And again, that's okay, right? Like we all have our own styles, and that self-awareness and the willingness to talk to other people about what's going on for us will usually put us back into that middle path, that balance that we need. So, I mean, another reason why, yeah, talk about your emotions, talk about how you're feeling.
Well, and sometimes we don't know how we're going to react to, like, so if you've never experienced something like, what happened at the Capitol, or,
And I have not.
Like living in a global pandemic, like those are things that like none of us have ever experienced. So we're going to find out in other ways what we are going to respond to in one way or another, right? Staying in our houses for weeks at a time, like that can take a toll. So we're going to realize, hey, I need to do something because of X, Y, and Z. I'm feeling this way. I don't have much social, interaction. Or with the Capitol, I don't feel safe right now. I don't know what's going on. What should I do? And it's like a trial by an error, like finding those things that are going to get those things out.
You just said something really, really important. Being able to say out loud, I don't feel safe right now.
Yeah.
It's so empowering, right? Yeah. And it's so often, and unless we like embrace these tough conversations, that kind of freedom that you get from making a statement like that isn't going to happen, right? So just being able to walk into a room with people that you trust and say, don't feel safe right now, is like, you let that balloon out a little bit.
Yeah. And I think of, like our team meeting, right? The fact that you have people around you that are experiencing the same thing, even if you're not going to respond to it the same way, like all of us had different ways of, coping or kind of following along with what was going on. But we all were able to voice the fact of like, this is really unsettling, right? I don't know how to feel right now. I feel like there's like, it gets it out into the open. And for some people, it makes it feel more real. But it also gives a chance for somebody to say back to you, I feel the same way, or I understand where you're
going. And that's so validating.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's so nice
to
be able to hear that.
Yeah. So I pulled up an article that had some interesting, so it's a Psychology Today article, but she had pulled in some research about like why it's important to talk about our feelings and what's happening from a neuroscience perspective, neurological perspective. So I'm going to pull that up. I think I'm going to pull it up on the screen. I'm going to try. I highlighted a couple of cool pieces. What do? Do I hit share screen?
Maybe. Technology is not my strong suit.
Application. Wait. No. Chrome tab. There it is. I see it. Okay. Can you see that, Nicole?
Yeah, we're here.
I did it. All right. So this is Dr. Diane Dreher. She has a blog on Psychology Today. And so a couple of pieces of research she found. So studies have shown that simply talking about our problems and sharing our negative emotions with someone we trust can reduce stress, strengthen the immune system, and reduce physical as well as emotional distress. And on the flip side of that, keeping painful secrets can increase the risk of illness. So I thought that was interesting. And then going down a little bit further, getting into the neuroscience studies, so labeling our feelings reduces activation in the amygdala. So that's the brain's alarm system that triggers fight or flight reaction. So that was the piece that I thought was like really interesting. Let me come back to us. There we go. So when we suppress our emotions, we're actually doing damage to our bodies, right? And there's there are changes that are happening in the brain. And then when we actually talk about our feelings, when we give ourselves permission to express and label our emotions, we're helping the brain heal. That was like exactly what I needed to read. Like, yes. I should be asking about your emotions.
When you were thinking, like when you were talking about that, the thing that immediately pops into my head are like toxins, right? Like if we're holding on to all of these stressful, like highly emotional things, and we've talked about this in another video of like cortisol levels like skyrocket, right? And if we have high levels of cortisol for a long amount of time, it becomes a toxin to our body, and it will start to affect us mentally and physically. And like the fact that that article was like saying that getting this stuff out, right? You're getting the toxins out, you're lowering those levels, you're able to have that human connection of like, you know, telling somebody about how you're feeling, possibly getting that response of like, and like validation of like, I hear what you're saying is valid, what you're saying I understand as well. Like I that can do wonders for you.
Yes, so healing. All right, so when you go to selfcaretips.org and you start working on your self-care plan, pay attention to the section that focuses on emotional self-care. And, you know, big surprise, the therapists are going to tell you to talk about your feelings, but really talk about your feelings. Or if you're not in a place or you don't have the right people around you to talk, use a journal and just write it out, right? That's almost as good. Maybe it's better in some ways. It's whatever works for you, but go ahead and express your thoughts and feelings so that you can be free of those toxins and survive this crazy world.
Amen to that.
Yeah. I'll see you next week, Nicole.
See ya.
Bye.